All right, thanks a lot. So I come from this family of these enthusiastic Greek builders, right? So my grandfather worked on the California highway system. My father laid the first fiber optic cable in downtown San Francisco. And my kids, my son's 14, my daughter's 9, they do all these crazy science experiments. My son's building PCs, my daughter's making like slime and all this crazy stuff. And they're like, Dad, enough of this blockchain stuff. Like, what do you actually make, right? And so if I'm successful today, you guys will actually see kind of what at Microsoft, we actually make when it comes to this crazy blockchain stuff. So first, of course, we've heard a lot of great discussion today about cryptocurrency moving beyond. So I think we're good there. We come in with some assumptions. So the things we really hear about from our customers is help us out with the patterns, help us out by setting some boundaries, right? We know that we want to kind of de-scope cryptocurrency and ICOs for now. Those are potentially very innovative. But again, in dealing with enterprise customers, they're kind of dipping their toes in and they want to get started. And really the way we try to help them get going is say, think of the smart contract as a state machine that can help you with kind of these one of three patterns, digitizing and transferring assets, cross-organizational and multi-party computational workflows, and then the high assurance audit log. And so what we see is with those three patterns, you can really fan out across industry. So of course, financial services is kind of the canonical pattern. That's really where this whole thing got started. But you can take those three and you can find track and trace scenarios in supply chain and manufacturing. You can find retail loyalty point scenarios. Again, that cross-organizational workflow fits very nicely when you've got an affiliate network that's looking to exchange those loyalty points. So really starting to put together those patterns in kind of these industry vertical ways starts to get customers pretty motivated. So it's like, okay, that starts to make sense. I kind of hear you there, but how do I actually turn that into a dev environment? I want to get started. I feel like I've done some homework. Business processes coming together. Business and tech are talking. How do I actually do something meaningful? Well, and again, this is purely from a Microsoft point of view, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. It's what I know. It's what I work on. But I think at least you can infer from this other tech patterns, if you will. So in Azure, we have something called the Marketplace. And the Marketplace is basically like an app store for infrastructure. So all you have is your Azure subscription. You can log on. And this is the variety of blockchain building blocks we have available today on the platform. So with just that infrastructure and just that subscription to start with, you can provision a Corda testnet, an Ethereum testnet, a Hyperledger Fabric testnet. You can have all of the necessary networking to segment your transaction processing nodes apart from your consensus building nodes. You can augment that with leading dev tools like Truffle. You can then put in additional development frameworks. We support Node.js and Python, whatever suits you as a company, whatever you're working in natively, our job is to meet you where you live. And then finally, scale out that infrastructure and make sure that it plays nice with the rest of your landscape. I'd say the 6 most patterns I see in talking with and working with customers are these right here. A lot of times customers get started just with their own Docker container. So they want to take a snapshot or a clone of an Ethereum node. They want to put it in a container, just get their feet wet doing smart contracts. It's great. It's fantastic learning. But it doesn't really take that next level out to scale, because how do you manage a firewall if you're just doing a Docker container ledger in your own environment? If you're successful, you're going to have all these wild peer-to-peer connections going on. So that's where we come in with these patterns, whether it's Ethereum, Corda, or Fabric, where you actually spin this infrastructure up in the cloud, work with your partners at arm's length. So now you're not threatening your operational infrastructure. We all still have IT operations to run, and putting this wild new blockchain kit in the middle of that might not be great for availability and for partner relations. So then what we advise is really blockchain and cloud better together type of scenario. Provision that stuff in the cloud, and especially if you're thinking about a consortium, bringing the consortium together over the cloud, over multiple subscriptions, makes perfect sense. The thing I'm really excited to talk about is that last tier on the lower right. We have a new product coming out called Azure Blockchain App Builder, where the design is don't just contend yourself with just the network and the ledger node, but actually build out a fully formed app where you have the ledger, that can be in a VM scale set. It can auto scale as the load increases. You can have a shielded API. You can have monitoring. You could have security that looks at corporate identities in your Azure Active Directory. Everything you need to really accelerate that blockchain app development. Here's the experience. You come to the portal. It's a wizard-driven exercise where you can have an Azure administrator, somebody with very limited blockchain skills to date, They can basically provide some metadata about your environment, about how you want your VMs to be administered, how they snap into Azure Active Directory. And within about 2 hours, this is what you get. You get a fully formed infrastructure. If we go kind of left to right, you start off with the front end. So we have app service, web, Node.js portal experience. They can also be provisioned to a mobile experience as well. It's fully integrated with your Active Directory, so I can bring my native network credentials, and actually I can use role-based access controls at the smart contract level to do permissioning and fine-grained controls there. That comes in through an orchestration layer. We have 2 tools there that we use, Event Hubs and Service Bus. These basically act like your Kafka or your routing mechanism to gather the transactions from the web front end and prepare to put them on the distributed ledger. What we're also doing is this idea of round tripping, because we're provisioning a SQL database as well. So we're provisioning off-chain storage in the form of SQL and the blob storage. Now, the blob store is interesting because you can actually hash and notarize documents, PDFs, images, what have you, store those in the blob store for optimization, and put the hash on the ledger of your choice. So then you have provenience and hashing for those materials. The SQL is interesting because in our experimentation, blockchain is not so good for read optimization and machine learning workloads and AI. So let's do all of that on SQL, where we have a much better, much familiar enterprise-grade set of tools, and let's let the ledger be optimized for our commit transactions. As we get deeper on, you then see the transaction builders and signers, which are optimized to work with native APIs for the ledger. And at time of release, we're planning to go with Ethereum and Hyperledger Fabric, but we're rapidly working with partners like Corda, R3, to get Corda into the mix and to get multi-ledger support on this pattern as well. So now I got dev test. Now I'm ready to move into smart contract design. And what we do with the app builder pattern is we say, okay, let's break it down. Let's make it very, very pragmatic to follow. Start by enumerating who are the personas that are actually going to transact on this blockchain system. Now what you're looking at here is we provide a sample app that ships with App Builder called Asset Transfer. So it's a very, very simplistic marketplace where you have buyers and sellers, and they're going to change titles of a car or some other type of physical asset. But you want to have an inspector and an appraiser to come in to make sure that there's fair market value being offered for the goods, and you also want to make sure that that asset is in proper working condition. So you got these 4 counterparties cross-organizational workflow, and they all need to know the state that each other's in before advancing the transaction. So I construct this very simplistic linear workflow. I see each of the counterparties transacting. And then here's where it starts getting good, is we take all of our customers through this exercise on App Builder with this table, and we say, right, on the far left here, you've got your existing states. We've enumerated all the states that this asset transfer can undergo. On the far right, those are my target states. So I'm trying to move left to right across to advance the state to achieve the completion of my smart contract, which results in the car title transfer going from the seller to the buyer. Now on the way, I'm able to collect, this is the data I want to put on the chain. So we immediately drive a really good conversation with business and tech about what is the data we're going to capture on the chain versus what can we leave off the chain. I've also got my functions. These actually we're going to see in code. Those are my programmatic smart contract functions. And when I pair those with the participants, that gives me my basis for access control. That's logic I can encapsulate in my Azure Active Directory. That's something I can work with my security team on to make sure that we got a robust permissions model and it gets everybody on the way. So as we talked about the code, so in the smart contract, we have a set of basically a base class that says this is going to work with our App Builder framework, and then it's pure Solidity from there on out, in this case, working with Ethereum. So here's where I actually take that permissioned or that ledger data model. We call it the constructor. So I've got my description, my asking price, the state changes. Here's where I've got the actual buyer placing the offer. So again, I can just literally take that table and I just lift it right into Solidity code. In these workshops, we have 2-3 days. We got business people writing Solidity code because we fill that chart ahead of time. So from the App Builder experience, I then hand that over to my App Builder administrator. They come into the web UI, and they basically have 3 functions to perform. One is they're just going to upload a Solidity file. Now, if you've worked with kind of the Geth clients in the wild, and you've gone through all the hassle and headache of compiling the smart contract, making sure it replicates, this is like push button stuff now. This is like graphical interface. I'm going to load in a Solidity file, 2 config files, and I'm done. We've also then got the user assignment. So once the smart contract's been loaded, I'm able to permission my users and assign the roles. So here's the experience where I'm actually uploading the Solidity file. We're going to do a Go chain code file for Hyperledger Fabric. There's the two config files. We're currently working on a wizard to simplify this even further, because right now there is some JSON you have to write to expose the access controls in the smart contracts. And then from there, now I start to see the smart contract in my assignment, and I can actually enumerate the users from my Active Directory and then assign them roles that have been exposed in that smart contract. So again, I get this nice fine-grained access control model to be able to administer my users on the blockchain app. So then it's time for actual transactions. So now I get the fully formed ledger on the system. So again, this is data that's been agreed to by both the ledger and off-ledger systems. And I actually have this series of transactions, in this case a series of cars that are for sale. But let's go deeper. Now if I click on one and I expand it, and again, this has all been provided by that app builder deployment. So if we think back a couple slides when we were doing that wizard next finish, you know, only code I've written so far is my Solidity. From that, this is all being generated by the Azure landscape. So I've got this UI with the buttons that are responding to my security permissions in my role that I've assigned. I've got an enumeration of all the other actors that have been assigned to participate on this particular smart contract. I've got a state machine diagram here so that as the workflow advances, all the counterparties can see exactly where we are in the state process. I've got the details of the smart contract. Again, we can just extend this and add attributes as needed. But really the most exciting part anyway for me is this idea of the linked transaction. So all the participants are going to see, hey, Barbara made a bid on this, and here's Barbara's key. So we know Barbara can't later back out and say, well, I never meant to bid on that asset. Yes, you did, because that's your private key. Oscar there is making a bid as well, or responding, in this case, rejecting Barbara's bid. So Barbara can't say, well, wait a minute, I thought we had an agreement to buy the car. No, we don't, because we see in the distributed ledger that we've got all these linked transactions pulled together on the system for all to see. Now, this UI is relatively rough and simplistic, so at time of launch, we're going to expose all of our APIs and document all of our APIs, so you could replace this entire UI with, you know, whatever, say, Angular JS UI of your making. So an example of this in the real world, Bank Hapoalim is one of our customers in Israel, and their scenario was bank guarantees. So what they effectively wanted to do is create a smart contract model of a bank guarantee. So if an engineering or construction firm was going to engage on a large-scale project, say build a shopping mall or build a hospital, it always surprises me when you get in these conferences like this, and there's a lot of enthusiasm about ledger type and ledger protocol and consensus mechanism and smart contract languages, but nobody talks about DevOps. Nobody talks about the versioning of the smart contracts. Nobody talks about the ledger health, the ledger behavior, infrastructure as code. And that's one of the things we as Microsoft think we really kind of bring to the table, is this idea of through like Jenkins pipelines and CI/CD infrastructure, again, all provisioned and managed by Azure, you could reach out across that network. Imagine an operator or a consortium model where then you have versioning and deployment capabilities for that infrastructure as code, for the smart contracts to move along the pipeline and to manage that environment. So that's really the tip of then this idea of non-functional requirements, because beyond deployment, beyond smart contracts, beyond consensus and networking, I have to deal with things like monitoring. So now I've got my network live, and I've got participants, you know, actually transacting on the system. What does that mean if one of those nodes fails? You know, can I diagnose root cause? What happens if there's an API version change? You know, we actually had this happen to us last week. We actually, by default, would just take the latest version of Ethereum. We'd pull down the latest version of Go, plug it into App Builder, and off and running. Well, in 1.8, we broke some APIs. We had some API mismatch, and it was like, oh, hang on, we got to go back and debug and figure out what's going on. So this kind of stuff, you really just have to be prepared for these kind of issues with this technology as it's moving so fast through the marketplace that things are going to break, version control issues are going to arise, smart contract calls are going to be suddenly deprecated, you know, API calls have to be instrumented, have to be monitored, have to be traced. You know, how are you going to do that? And there's very little out there to guide us because we're so early days in this. Well, again, for us, it's like bring it back to fundamentals. Bring it back to what we know works well from a hyperscale cloud perspective. And for us, that means application and infrastructure monitoring. So really trying to have this single pane of glass on that blockchain network. Even if it means going node by node, subscription by subscription, where we put in what we call our OMS or our log analytics solutions to look at all of the different infrastructure pieces, but then we also instrument the APIs for a solution called Application Insights that we provide. So again, the nice thing is when you deploy App Builder, it's got the App Insights hooks already deployed for you. So now what that means is I can actually see API level calls. So when I'm invoking the various services and I'm sending transactions from my web layer into my ledger, I can actually have telemetry and traces to do debugging in case anything fails. Another big one for non-functional requirements is this idea of secure DevOps. So it's one thing to just say, okay, we're going to manage the smart contract versions. We're going to use the CI/CD pipelines to actually deploy those versions and ensure synchronicity across the network. We're then going to instrument and have telemetry from our application monitoring and from our infrastructure monitoring. Well, what about security and compliance? You know, how am I going to deal with things that, oh, by the way, I'm one rogue admin administrator away from somebody killing the whole deployment and then really sabotaging the entire network? So how do you lock down the cloud subscription? So again, I think this is one of those interesting, value adds. If done right, the cloud certainly accelerates and is a leapfrog versus, doing on-prem. Doing on-prem, you're confined to, whatever the local infrastructure constraints are, the local IT constraints are. But yet here, we've got a programmatic model, and this is available actually on GitHub today, not just for blockchain, but for any Azure deployment. It's called our AZ SDK, where you can actually run a series of security checks against the subscription and make sure that there's no untoward or escalation of privileges going on. I've also got verification tests. So as I version my blockchain app and my entire infrastructure as code landscape, I can actually subject that basically to static analysis tests. So I'm looking for vulnerabilities. I'm looking for secrets in source. I'm looking for ports that are open that shouldn't be. Because again, with blockchain networks, people don't really take time to appreciate. You're putting endpoints out on the public network if you really want to transact. Think about the nastiness of cybersecurity in 2018 and what publicly exposed endpoints can be made to do. It's very critical that that infrastructure gets subjected to a battery of tests to make sure that you don't have things too open and too permissive in order to just execute that smart contract. CI/CD we talked about a lot. It's really, again, continually managing the code through the pipeline. If you have to rely on manually setting up a blockchain each and every time, imagine you're going participant by participant and you're installing the Hyperledger libraries, you're installing the Corda libraries, all the right jars, all the right versions of Node, all of the packages. It becomes a real nightmare to manage, and this is one of those blockers that we see preventing folks and enterprises from going to production. Well, if you can automate all that, you put all that code into a process where the pipeline takes care of it on your behalf, it's going to be so much more advantageous and much more easy to audit. And that last point becomes especially crucial when you form this the consortium. And in early days, the consortium members are all trying to feel each other out, and they want to make sure that no bad code is getting into the system. They want to take a high degree of assurance. Well, what better way to do that than actually to put the CI/CD material out there for all to see and to track. We have runbooks, we talked about the monitoring, and really all this leads up into this idea of risk governance. So cloud risk governance, again, if you're taking this back to an on-prem model, how do you do risk governance and assessment if organization 1 runs the blockchain in their data center and organization 2 runs it in their data center? Good luck trying to get one organization's IT department to talk to themselves, let alone 2 different organizations. What about 10? What does that start looking like at scale? We tell people imagine success. What if you have 20 different, 30 different companies transacting on one blockchain workflow? How are you going to manage risk assessments? How are you going to manage security patching? Really moving that workload to the cloud and giving everybody access to the telemetry in a thoughtful manner really helps accelerate that along. So bottom line is we're really committed to helping customers out with their journey. We really want to learn that if we've got the feature mix wrong, fantastic. Let us know what else is out there. Because for us, this is not just about POCs, it's not just about the arcane debates about which consensus algorithm is better or which protocol is better. It's about how do we actually take customers on a transformative journey and land this stuff in production in a way that actually reverberates across the marketplace and results in the mainstreaming of this technology. We really want to accelerate value out of it. We don't want to just keep it, locked inside of the labs. And we really want to actually inspire both business and IT to do more to empower themselves. Not that they have to then go out and get a bunch of expensive consultants to help them figure this out, but it should be easy, it should be turnkey, it should be in their hands to really try and drive it. And on that last point, what's really exciting for us at Microsoft is we're actually making this available across our entire fleet of 42 Azure regions, which includes our 2 brand new regions coming up here in South Africa. So for the first time, you'll have public cloud Azure regions in South Africa that could then host these workloads. So again, really excited about the potential to unblock, regulated workloads in South Africa on public cloud in our regions. Finally, it's really about that scenario identification. So we hope that by providing these sample code scenarios in the app builder, we'll be able to inspire you to then take that, lift, shift, port, and do these workshops in your own environments to try and become your own blockchain product managers, again, without all that expensive consulting and customized overhead. So getting started today, it's very easy. We have a number of resources where you can actually join the Azure Blockchain App Builder private preview. Coming in May, we hope that have that generally available for folks to get on. All you need is an Azure subscription and an Azure admin and their email address to get started. We have some pretty great blog materials out on our website, so just go to azure.com, hit the blog link. We've got a separate category for blockchain. Also strongly encourage everybody to go to azure.com to the marketplace. We've also got a blockchain category there. And with that, we're happy to take some questions.
Hey, I'd like to know for your Solidity contracts, do you have code analysis for that, like you have for C#? And with changing the Solidity code, where you transition from one state to another state, also then reversely update the state diagrams that you have?
Yes, so right now, when App Builder ships, it's going to be native smart contract code for Solidity for Ethereum and Go for Fabric. One of the things we're working on, it's in our backlog immediately after ship, is this idea of enterprise smart contracts, where you can imagine taking like an Azure function, a logic app, a .NET library in C#, compiling that, giving that executable a set of credentials and a set of keys, and then actually pointing that to App Builder as the smart contract runtime. So then now you can actually extract out the smart contract logic from the ledger, put it in that enterprise smart contract, and then have it call into the ledger using those credentials. The other thing that'll unblock is actually go get off-chain data. So basically, it's going to be our pattern for doing oracles using App Builder. In terms of the flows, the nice thing is you're really, the sky's the limit. All you have to do is in the smart contract just enumerate all the different states you want, and certainly we're able to help you and work with you kind of identify kind of an optimal state machine diagram for that, but it's really straightforward in terms of how you want to enumerate that.
Hello, great presentation. Thank you. Majority of the new entrants in the blockchain sphere are generally going to be startups. When I hear Microsoft, I hear expensive in the background, right? So how are you going to make this affordable to the new startups? And I heard a similar thing or a similar product that Amazon is launching. So I don't know, how are you going to make it? How are both these companies going to make it affordable for startups who don't have much money initially? Great question. So we have a program today called BizSpark, and BizSpark is our startup accelerator where we will provide startup applicants with a pile of Azure credits that will really accelerate them through. The idea is, look, if you're a startup and you haven't launched yet, we don't want to take your money at that point. I mean, get to market, go to production, start to scale. So we want to help those startups along. And again, the nice thing about this model is you're just paying on consumption. So you can imagine if you're a startup and you're in dev test and you have just limited test environments, we can really help subsidize those early days with the BizSpark program. And then as you scale and then you start growing and getting traffic, okay, then we can look at transforming the relationship from there.
So my question is this service going to be available for all the countries in Africa? For some of us in Zimbabwe, we've been excluded from quite a lot of services by Microsoft. So this time around, we are kindly demanding that we get this service available. Yeah, if it's for payment issues, I think we have sorted out the payment issues. We can pay with crypto, so people can go and buy crypto, and we can pay with crypto. So don't worry about us paying for the service. We just want the service.
So I hear you on that. So I'm actually proud to say I work on projects in Nigeria, Senegal, and Kenya. So I definitely feel you on that. We do have a lot of work to do with getting the payment aspects going, to unblock customers, to get trial accounts on the continent, to get accelerated. So definitely there's a lot of work that's going on and is going to be delivered there. I think landing the South Africa region is definitely going to help expedite that and drive that, giving the continent much more visibility and focus to home office, as well as these projects that we're doing, across the region. So the more projects and the more demand we see for the services, the faster we can go with getting everything unblocked and all of the African countries on par with the rest of the world in terms of Azure availability.
Michael, thank you very much for that insight.